How's it going, folks? You're back for another episode of the Popcorn Square Podcast, episode number 33, and we're going to be really going into Ungentlemanly Warfare here. Quick review on the film. We've talked about it a couple times on the podcast. I'll give my thoughts. This is Neff. I'm joined with
Kage.
And Buttons.
Alrighty, so yeah, off the rip, I'm giving it a 7.5 out of 10. I thought the movie was pretty well done. We're not going to give up too many details, but I would advise people to go watch that movie. I've talked to other people as well that saw the film, and they've told people to go watch the film. Ritchie directing, Henry Cavill as the main character, Gus Phillips. We have Alan Ritchson in there as well. Great cast. Eiza Gonzalez as well, playing, I believe, Stewart. Her last name is Stewart. Let me see her first name here. Let me go through it. She's playing Marjorie Stewart. Alan Ritchson is Anders Lassen. We have Henry Golding as Freddie Alvarez. We talked about Bob's. He's Mr. Heron. We saw that there, Kage. And then Til Schweiger as Heinrich Luhr. He's really like the main antagonist of the film. But yeah, great cast. Guy Ritchie is the director. Good film overall. Pacing was really well. The story was great. This is a, I guess you could say, factually historic film. And they just brought it to the big screen. The movie isn't performing like we thought it would. Actually, it's probably doing less than we thought it would. But
A lot less.
I mean, don't let the numbers shy you away from this film. The film is a good film. It's a film that you should see. It's a very entertaining film. The action is great. The dialogue, it does what it needs to do to get you through the film. It doesn't have the depth as like what you'd see in like maybe a Tarantino film or anything like that from a different director. But I think the action scenes are great. I think the story is great, and it just gives you another slant on the whole World War II era, just of film and stuff like that in that story, and a different story altogether in that. But yeah, I definitely advise that people actually go out and watch this film. Great acting all the way around. I thought even the direction from Guy Ritchie was pretty solid. And, if you're a fan of these time period piece films, war films, anything like that, Black Ops specifically type stuff, I think this is right up your alley. Yeah, I didn't really have too many bad things to say about it. I think it does kind of lack that grandiose appeal that a Tarantino film would have. And I know we've talked about like comparisons to Inglourious Bastards. We talked about how the trailer kind of reminded us of that, and the film does remind you of that when you watch it. But I think it lacks just the grandiose appeal to it, and it lacks the strength of dialogue that those films have. But all in all, as its own standalone project, I do think it was a good film. I do think, the film deserves to make money, and I think people should go out and watch it. And I just think it is a solid film overall. But I'll pass it off to Kage. I know he saw it as well, and he has some thoughts, and then we'll go into some other topics on the film.
Yeah, thanks, Neff. So Ungentlemanly Warfare, I'm going to have to agree with Neff. I also give it a 7.5 out of 10. It was just a really good time, and I feel like it was kind of a palate cleanser after Argyle. Sorry, Buttons. But
For Henry Cavill.
Yeah, for Henry Cavill. I mean, I've seen a lot of good things with Henry Cavill. So despite my feelings towards Argyle, I really enjoyed this. I went into it with an open mind. It was a good time. Many comparisons, many vibes comparable to Inglourious Bastards. But unlike Inglourious Bastards, this was like based on true story, because when you're dealing with a film like Inglourious Bastards, there's a little bit of scariness to it because you're dealing with Nazis, and that is a historical thing. But there's just a lot of comedy to offset that terror, if you will. It had tense moments and like that, and so there were tense moments in this, but the heroes always made it out somehow. They're very crafty, and there was humor woven within the scenes. I think when we're talking about comparisons to Inglourious Bastards, I think really what it boils down to is, do you as a fan, as an audience member, do you lean more towards the comedic side? Is that what gives it a higher score to you? Or maybe you lean more towards, I like this more because it's historically accurate. Again, going back to what Neff said, if you're one of those war buffs, more specifically the Black Ops stuff, so I think that right there is going to determine where you go with this score-wise. But yeah, I completely agree with Neff. Let's get some more numbers for the box office for this film. I recommend you guys go see it. Don't let the budget fool you, the box office fool you. Right now, it's not doing so good. We had a budget of 60 mil, and so far, box office, we're looking at 15.4 mil. So that is a
Ouch.
bomb. That is a
Yeah.
bomb. Actually, I'm without looking at it, I'm gonna say that numbers wise, that might be even better, less than Argyle. Did Argyle do?
You mean like the percentage wise?
Yeah, I mean Argyle. What was its return? What was its box office?
I think they got. I think we were saying it was close to 90 something.
Either 90 or
There you
100,
go.
something
And I
like
think,
that.
and you know what too? I think the box office kind of plays into the fact that they had an all-star budget with Argyle. This was kind of a smaller cast, I think, as
Yeah,
far
we
as well-known.
speculated.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
speculated on the budget for this film, and we kind of were in the same ballpark. I think I said between like 60 or 80 million.
Yeah.
What did you say, Buttons, for Ungentlemanly Warfare as far as budget? You thought?
I thought it was gonna do probably about 100 to 150.
No, I'm saying budget.
The budget for sorry. No. So I looked up the budget for Argyle. The budget for Argyle was about 200, and it only made 96. But for the budget for Ungentlemanly, the longest name ever. as far
We're
as-
doing the shortened name on this, and the book that it's based upon is even longer.
Yeah. Kage, what did you speculate that budget was going to be? Just from kind of seeing footage in the trailer.
Yeah, like I don't know. I kind of thought it would be a little higher than 60 mil, but again, I think the main difference between this and Argyle, and I know we keep mentioning Argyle, but that's the most recent Cavill film that we have to reference at the moment, because that had a full all-star budget. They had Dua Lipa on there, you know, so now you have a celebrity, so that budget has to be high. I mean, they had everybody. It's kind of like Ocean's 11, if you will. But this was, I think, the only person I recognized was Henry Cavill. I recognized,
Alan Ritchson.
yeah. I even recognized, I Feel Terrible, the guy, that black guy with the, he had the
Bob's.
hookups. Yeah, I liked his character. It was a very enjoyable film. I really don't have any complaints about it. I like how it was shot. I like how it was like, we're not supposed to be doing this, but if you
Yeah.
get caught, you're on your own. The typical Black Ops
Yeah.
mantras, if you will.
Yeah.
But all in all, it was a really good time.
Yeah, guys, and if you go watch this film, just know that, Henry Cavill, Eiza Gonzalez, Alan Ritchson, those are really the main keys to this film. Like I said, we talked about Bob's as Mr. Heron. He's a pretty big character as well in that, and I hope I'm pronouncing his first name correctly. But yeah, he's a big character as well. And I also have to credit Guy Ritchie with being able to keep all the characters on screen even at different times and keeping everybody still involved. You do have a pretty lengthy cast here, but I never felt like someone was getting more screen time than anybody else, or I never really felt like, oh, where's this person been? Now, like I said, there are characters that play into the main core, main cast, I should say, but I never feel like they're really left out. They still show up, they still play their part, and it's still a team effort. And when you're watching this film, there's different dynamics that take place. It starts out in one setting, and then it moves to another setting with solid fluidity, and then they introduce new characters halfway through, and it never really feels like it's a forced thing. So, I thought that was really cool as well, as far as how you actually go into putting a film together and you try to figure out how you're going to actually implement all these different moving parts, because we've seen lengthy casts before and it doesn't work. For example, I believe it was Eternals, a lengthy cast as well. And I would argue that really the star power is about the same outside of, I would say, Angelina Jolie type star power. But, you have Henry Cavill, he's the main guy there, and he kind of takes the lead. But like I said, Alan Ritchson is a very underrated character in the film and actually does a really great job playing Anders Lassen. It's just like, the guy's a brooding man, really gets down and dirty with his hands. And, you know what I mean? And so he really shows you just the different, I guess, aspects of that character on screen. Eiza Gonzalez as well as Marjorie Stewart. She does a great job as well. Yeah, and it's just like it's a really good movie overall. I do feel like maybe the marketing kind of hindered this movie from having more widespread appeal because it is a decent movie, and also too, it could be, as we've said before, and as Kage had just said, the Inglourious Basterds comparisons that we've been having when we were talking about this movie in regards to that maybe people have said, I've already seen this type of movie before, so I'll skip this one. Like I said, it could be one of those things. It could be that the marketing didn't get in front of enough people in time, and it could also be that maybe people feel like they've already seen this type of film, so they kind of are shy to going into the movies. And as we know, folks, movies are not cheap anymore, so it is expensive. You kind of got to pick and choose what you want to see. And so I could see people sitting back and saying, you know what, looks decent, but I think I'll take my chances with streaming. But, I've said this multiple times, great movie, based on historical events, like Kage said as well. I just think it's a really cool film that people should get out there and watch. And the Lionsgate was doing the distribution on this thing. We have Jerry Bruckheimer as a producer, so there's a lot of big names on this. And as we said, guys, this is based on a book by Damian Lewis, Churchill's Secret Warriors, the explosive true story of the Special Forces desperados of World War II. So yeah, very interesting stuff. But yeah, like we said, we talked about the budget a little bit, $60 million. Box office $15.4 million, underperforming, not doing good right now. Personally, after watching this movie myself, and like I said, I'm not trying to give away too many details to you guys, especially specifically about the plot, but I would love to see a sequel to this film. I would like to see a sequel to this film moving forward. As we all know, this is a business. If the movie doesn't do well, there's most likely not going to be a sequel. But I thought the story was good enough to where even if you don't use historical events to like follow up with this, let's just say you come up with a fictional story. I still think with this strong cast, and if you get a good writer and you keep Guy Ritchie on as director, you can come up with a decent story and continue the story with this cast, even if it's not factually accurate, based off what we saw in this movie that is factually accurate. So it's something that I'd be interested in seeing. The way the film ends, it kind of alludes to maybe something else coming down the line, but the movie has to perform, and based off what we're seeing right now, it's not performing well enough. Like I had said, I was being generous with my prediction. I expected possibly a box office of $150 million at most. I think maybe $100 million was the low ball for me, but it looks like we're not even probably going to get to $50 million on this thing. So it looks like at this point, unless there's some type of phenomenon where everybody wants to go to the movies and watch Ungentlemanly Warfare, that is probably not even going to crack its production budget. So yeah, with that being said, I'll pass it off to Kage on his thoughts about the budget, box office, and then I'll let him go into if he'd like to see a sequel, and then we'll move on to a couple other topics.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the budget and the box office, I'm a little shocked on both fronts. The budget, well, I shouldn't say both fronts. Like 60 mil, like after watching it, I think it sounds pretty fit. I mean, everything was done pretty practically. We're not talking about a sci-fi movie, so it's not like we're doing a lot of CG, green screen. I'm sure there's people on zip lines. They had practical explosions. It is what it is. But it was a good time. The box office, though, that one's a little shocking. I feel like this film deserves a lot more than that. It wasn't Avengers Endgame, but I really think it deserves more. It really deserves more. I highly recommend that you guys out there listening, don't let that box office scare you off from seeing it. Please give it a chance. Go see it. I mean, we here at Popcorn Square, we generally feel pretty good about the film. Speaking on the sequel idea, I don't know. I think I'm a little on the opposite end, Neff, because there's when you have a movie that's based on historical facts and stuff, generally it's cool to see that depicted on the screen. But then as soon as you make a sequel that is just fabricated, I feel like that can overall hurt the thing, because now you're starting to dip away from that story. You're taking it overall, because if you were going to do a film set in that era and and just make your own story, then you should have done that from the very beginning, and people would watch it. I know I would. Like Inglourious Bastards, they didn't kill Hitler in a theater and burn a bunch of Nazi, you know what I mean? But it just makes for great entertainment. You know what I mean?
And it's like something people would want to see.
Right.
Like,
So,
oh yeah, they're gonna kill them, and then they're gonna shoot Hitler in the face 100 times.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, it goes back to what I said before. It's like do you want to see a film that's historically accurate, or do you want something set in that time period that may not be real, but just a good time? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you gotta pick one or the
you
other.
got to pick one or the other. If you're gonna try and do a balance, is it possible? Absolutely. And I think this is an example of that. I'm sure they didn't follow. I've never read the book. I'm pretty sure we haven't. None of us have read it.
Definitely probably going to pick it up and read it, because the movie actually made me more interested in actually reading the book.
And that's what I like about historical films, is like when you give me a film based on history, if there's a book, or even if there's not a book, I'm like, you know what? I want to go on Google. I want to learn more about this. I want to look about it, Wikipedia, look in the library, articles, whatever. That's the signs of a good film. When you base it off a true story, a historical event, and you make me want to do research on my own, that's a film that sticks with you. That's something that you're thinking about after you walk out of the theater. I think that's a good thing. And I will say, the only spoiler I will say about this film is at the end, it shows pictures of the real people and tells a little bit about what happened to them after. I was like, that was really cool. Now, in terms of a sequel, if there's more to tell, let's see it. Let's see it. And again, this goes back to reading the book. Reading the book. I want to know what more goes on, because you got this team of people that don't exist on a mission that doesn't exist, and they pull off something that shouldn't be possible. And it's like, oh man, they pulled off this heist, this mission, whatever. They did it really well, and I would love to see them do something again. And kind of going back to earlier episode that we had when we talked about sequels, what's it called? The Beekeeper. When we talked about Beekeeper, that was a first film. It was very similar to John Wick. But it was really good for what it was. And we talked about it back then that we'd want to see a sequel. We don't want to see Fast and Furious 14, 15. We don't want to see that many ungentlemanly warfares, like that. But I would be open to seeing one more movie with this team, and seeing.
And they kind of allude to that with Churchill at the end, where he's like, "Oh, these guys are mine now." So
yeah,
it's like,
exactly. So it could open it up to that.
Oh, yeah,
it could open to that. Now, unfortunately, with this box office, I don't think so. I don't think it's gonna get it. Do I want it? Yes. Do I think it's gonna get it? No.
Good point you made there, and I'm gonna ask you as well. Just looking a little more into the story, and like I said, once I read this book, then I'll know a lot more. But I've had a couple talks with some other people about it, just kind of speculating. Now we know that main cast there. We know that the majority of those people are like real people, right? Mm-hmm. But I wonder if a lot of the other supporting players are actually real people as well. That's one thought that I had, because you notice, they did kind of go through at the end. Going through different people's, I guess you could say, biographies on what happened after the events of this, but they never go into that supporting cast either. So it really made me wonder, is that real, or was that kind of just placed in the film to push the plot forward? Because we've seen that happen in movies as well. So it kind of makes me wonder if they did kind of play with that as well, and if they did play with that, then they could probably still find a way to string together a sequel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you use that aspect. But
it
like
really,
we said, if
it
it's
boils
one of
down
those,
to-
if it's hard facts, everybody in here, real person, really was involved, then like you said, point makes 100% sense. You gotta start one way and stick to it.
You gotta commit. You can't change halfway through.
If you change it, or it starts going in a different direction, it's like, oh well, that was real, but this isn't. We've seen it happen before in movies, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think I'm really speaking more to just the ensemble of the cast, because I feel like this cast works well together. So it'd be cool to see them in a same type film, or like we said, kind of like a sequel of this on another mission, maybe something different country. But like
we
said,
gotta
we
gotta get our hands on that book, because I want to know what else this team. There's no way this team did all this.
Right.
made it out alive,
that
completed the
was it.
mission
Yeah.
accomplished, and played a major part in World War II.
Yeah.
Many things, both good and bad, happened in World War II, and
What
this
do you-
is
So
What you
let
got,
me
Buttons?
ask you,
Yeah.
a question, both you guys, about this, because, we talked about how the style of this movie, even though it is a movie based on factual events and things, it's definitely compared to the other movies that have been done recently, and then the ones of just note that come to mind, other than Inglourious Bastards, which is less of a factually based movie,
Yeah.
compared to the ones that actually were happening. And I'll just throw out some names. Most recently, we would have had Oppenheimer. There would have been The Imitation Game, Operation Mincemeat, The Monuments Men. These movies, even going into even Atonement, for that matter.
Valkyrie.
Valkyrie, so a lot of these movies, you sit there and you're like, oh, they're based on factual events, but they have a very serious tone to them.
Yeah.
They look at it from, as far as what factual event they're trying to describe, whether it's Operation Mincemeat and it had to do with D-Day, or it's Oppenheimer, which has to do with, the atomic bomb, right? So you look at these type of movies and they bring a very serious element and undertone to the movie, and they did well. Most of these movies that I mentioned did well. Not all of them, obviously, but the majority of the audience members that would have watched these movies, that's what they're expecting out of those type of movies. They're like, oh, it's going to be a serious movie, but it's going to be an interesting thing that we didn't know actually happened. For example, Operation Mincemeat is also another retelling of The Man Who Didn't Exist, or something like that, or The Man Who Never Was, I believe. And so both of these are different books written about the same thing. Now, obviously, when we look at these factual events, and even with this movie in particular, we know that the government is going to hold on to the intel, behind these for security reasons, because they don't want the classified information to come out until enough time has passed to where, anybody involved or anything like that is going to make a difference. Oh, nobody's going to be like, oh, I can't believe you did that, I'm going to go kill your whole family. It's stuff like that they keep classified for security reasons.
Sure.
And obviously, at this point, when you look at all these movies that have come out, it's like, okay, that's because they got declassified. They got a book made about them, and then somebody was like, hey, let's make this into a movie. Enough time has passed, and people hear about it, like you said, read books and go, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great to see a movie that tells this story? Or to your point, Kage, you're like, oh, I didn't know anything about this. Now I want to know more. And, because somebody will pull a story that, they're like, oh yeah, didn't you ever hear about this story about these people? And you're like, no, man, that's a great idea for a movie. And
Kind
then,
of makes you wonder, how many stories do we not know about that
Oh,
are
I'm
hidden
sure
under
there's-
wraps? I'm sure there's a lot of,
I'm sure there's
great
tons of
stories.
stories.
Movie,
For
but
sure.
look, we talk about the
And from all sides.
yeah.
Yeah,
and from
that's a great
different-
point.
And from different countries as well. So as far as, throughout history, time, whatever, history, universe, and everything. But when it comes to this movie, do you think that because it was brought in as kind of that undertone of being grittier, being more, less of a straight-laced, factual, almost, documentary type of movie to, oh no, this is an action film. Yeah, it's based in fact, but it's they're swearing and it's nitty gritty and it's like the true soldier's perspective more than, somebody telling you a history lesson about, hey, these are the things that happened and here's how it happened. And
It's more of an action film.
yeah, it's more of,
Yeah.
but I mean, like I guess you could say, a direct comparison would be Shakespeare, right? So Shakespeare wrote a story that was in all history, and I'll just throw like, I don't know, like King, was it King Lear or Macbeth? Let's just use Macbeth. All right. So Macbeth, right? He tells this story, but he always wrote down to the what they would have called like the penny penny fair people, which, you know, these are people who are uneducated for the most part. They're going to go see a show. They want to be entertained. He'd throw a lot of flowery words out there for the higher paid audience, you know, or the higher educated audience members. And then he'd throw little jokes and little things in there that only the underlings are going to understand, like, because they want to be entertained too. So do you feel like this movie is kind of like the lower class version of these type of documentary style movies? Like,
No, to me, this is just Inglourious Bastards light.
again, but
But
Inglourious
it's not
Basterds
like-
uses
it's not a
swearing,
lower,
a
like-
lot of blood, a lot of action.
This is the same,
a
but
lot
it's
more
a different
physical.
style.
Okay.
Like Tarantino's style is very dramatic.
Well, it's
this
very
is
dramatic.
but it's like lower dramatic. Like it's Inglourious. If anybody's seen Inglourious Bastards, it's like, okay, I'm gonna shoot this guy with this gun. He's gonna fly through the door. Like there's
Everything's
that
exaggerated.
aspect, but it's just down. Like it's like they didn't have the budget to do what Tarantino did. That's why I
No,
said it's
but
less
they're-
grandiose.
Yeah.
It's like Inglourious Bastards, but it doesn't have the grandiose look. It doesn't have the grandiose appeal. It doesn't have the drama
No,
behind it.
what I'm asking is, do
Yeah.
you think that they were trying to cater towards a different audience?
No.
No.
Like, you think that the history
think they were
buffs,
literally
the
trying
history
to-
buffs would have gone and enjoyed this movie
Yeah.
because the dialogue is there?
The
Because they're
dialogue's not
learning
that. The
about a
dialogue's not
historical
that strong.
fact.
It's just more
So
based
do-
off action.
Well,
it's
right,
not
and
based
that's what
off
I'm
just
saying.
that.
Do you think
right.
that they're just looking for the action crowd because they made an action
Yeah,
movie?
they're looking for the crowd that likes Inglourious Bastards, because Inglourious Bastards,
Right.
yeah, people like. There's people that don't like dialogue. There's people that don't like Tarantino
Right.
movies because it's
Yeah.
too dialogue-y.
Right,
and
and
you
that's
have
what
to be
I'm
paying
saying.
attention. But not
People-
everything that's said in Inglourious
Yeah.
Bastards necessarily is like, oh, that's factually correct. Like not necessarily.
Well,
like,
no, but let me make this comparison.
Yeah, yeah.
People were walking out of Oppenheimer
Right.
because it was too serious, because it was too dry for them.
I didn't
It was
hear that.
too wordy.
Did they?
Yeah, people
Oh, I
were
didn't
doing
know
this. They
that.
were going in watching Barbie instead.
I heard people comparing.
Barbie is
the-
like mindless.
Remember with Tenet?
whatever.
Remember Tenet? I heard
Yes.
more people complaining about the sound mixing than
Right.
the actual like movie. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
they
I
were
know
like,
what
it's
you're
too
talking about.
loud,
Yeah.
like,
Right.
or it took me out of the movie. But I
Right.
didn't. That's
It's
news to me that
distracting.
people were walking
Yeah.
out. But
But
okay.
again, so my point is this, is if Oppenheimer is a very serious movie, it's a very, you know, you have to pay attention to the dialogue, and
Right.
and then you have this movie in direct
I see what you're
comparison.
saying. You
is
got to
it's
be
a
into the art of
action-
cinema to
Yeah, it's a-
appreciate art Oppenheimer. If you're not into cinema, you're probably not gonna like it.
Right.
So this, no, you don't have to be into cinema.
This is-
really.
I-
this is very easy. Like you can sit through it. Like there's some scene. To me, it wasn't a lot of slow scenes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not like a lot of like thinking that goes into. I guess I see what you're saying. Like to me, and I'm into cinema, so I know how to like change my like perspective on what I'm watching. I can watch a movie like Dune and be like, okay, I'm involved in this, and then I can watch a movie like Ungentlemanly Warfare and understand that it's not going to be that serious. Like I can just tell it's not going to be that serious because of how they're actually marketing this film.
Right.
Even though there's things that happen that it's like, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. But
Yeah, and that's
I see
what
what
I'm
you're
saying
saying. It's
is,
like a
like, you
different
have-
perspective of the movie you're actually going to watch, and it comes down to the viewer. Almost
Yeah.
kind of like what you're saying. I don't think it's necessarily marketed towards like a certain audience so much, other than like it's
I
really
think
upon
they're-
the viewer. Like, what are you going to look for? Are you going to appreciate this in it? Are you going to appreciate that? I watched the movie. I was more into, okay, dang, I actually want to look into the book.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are actually going to even look into this book. They'll probably be like, oh, all right.
Well, it was an action movie. I
Yeah.
enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
it was. This
That's
was
like
a.
the difference of film, like watching film. Are you actually engaged in the material, or are you just worried about what's on screen, and then you forget about the material when you leave? So I see what you're saying. It depends on, I think, really the viewer.
Right, but
Good
that
point,
was
though.
that was my question, is this targeting an audience that they're in it for the good time, they're not in it for the history lesson? And that's kind of what I'm getting
This-
at,
It's
is,
a balance.
you
It's
know,
an action movie with historical undertones.
right.
And it doesn't. I feel like, in my opinion, I feel like it's a good balance between the two. Because if it was straight history, it would be more serious and all that stuff. And then the action, it wasn't over the top, like excessive gore, like you punch somebody and they fly through two windows, like, you know what I mean? Like, so
There
I
was
think
definitely
it
some
was
violence, though.
It was some. It's violence. It's not Inglourious Bastards violence, but I think it was
To
a
me, it's
balance
set
between.
more. It's like it's not realistic in a sense, but it's almost more realistic than Inglourious Bastards as far as the action.
I'll give it that.
Like, there's things that happen when you watch this buttons, you're gonna be like, I mean, seriously, but it's not like we just said, we're not shooting Hitler in the face 200 times and then zooming in on his face falling apart. Like, it's just like okay, dude, like, or just like just different things that would happen if you shot someone in the face.
action.
But it's like we said, it's toned down, like you said, the dramatic everything, like big. It's gotta have a gallon of blood on the wall. Like, you don't see that. in
This isn't
movie.
Mortal Kombat.
You see Alan Ritchson mess some people up,
Yeah.
but it's
Right.
realistic. Like, you mess some people up, and then that's it. They're not a big
Yeah.
ball.
And
of
we don't
goo.
focus. We don't focus on the scene. Like, there's no one getting ripped apart, and organs everywhere. It's not like that. It shows the action scene. Somebody gets killed, Nazis getting killed, whatever, and they move on. And they don't sit there and like slow pan and zoom in so you can
That's
take
a
it
good
all
point.
in.
That's
It's not
actually
like
a really
that.
good question you had, though, Buttons.
Yeah.
It's like really a dynamic. Like, what's the dynamic of the film?
It just really
Is
depends
it
on your
appealing
audience.
to the audience that is really into historical events like this, or is it appealing to just people that are into action? And I think to
And
answer the
then-
question, like we said, it's almost like balanced.
Yeah.
I think if someone was into history, I kind of like seeing this type of stuff too, like with the World War II era and stuff like that. It's kind of like, oh, this is interesting stuff. You know what I mean? Even just like the little detail, like the guns. Like, I like the Sten MK that Henry Cavill's actually using, like stuff like that. If you're into that type of stuff, then I think it will trigger some things in your historical brain. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
if you're not into that, I think you would still like it as well, because it's action, so it's just based off really the viewer. But I
Right.
thought that's a pretty good question.
Absolutely.
I don't know what they went into because I'm not at the studio. Like, I'd have
Right.
to ask Guy Ritchie, what's
Well-
your appeal to this? Like, why did you do it like this?
Well, I
What-
mean,
who did you
obviously,
think this would appeal to?
different projects that get greenlit in Hollywood, we know that they're gonna have a target audience, obviously. Just like with Oppenheimer, for example, they know that the people who enjoy a good historical movie and enjoy World War II,
To me,
kind
this
of
would definitely, if I were to
info.
say like a real demographic, like not even, let's just say like people thinking deeply, I would just say it definitely older. Because now we're talking about World War II. Like, how many people that are 19 years old really care about World War II?
Well, but
Not
see, that's
that
my
none
question,
do,
is
but-
did they focus it in the movie to be something that, even if, regardless of your age, even if you're just somebody who's like, oh, it's a war movie, there's gonna be action scenes, it's gonna be fighting, and like you said, it's gun warfare, so that's a whole different type of action movie versus like a martial arts movie or something to that effect. And I mean, even if you were to like say a direct comparison to two different action movies that would have been recently one of the ones we already talked about, which was Roadhouse. Roadhouse is an action film. It has a lot of fight scenes. It has a lot of, but those are usually like physical, hey, I'm going to punch this dude and that kind of action. Yes, there's little bits of guns and things like that as well. But for the most part, it's guys beating each other up in a bar. Like, that's the action parts of the movie. And then this one, like you said, it's a battlefield action, or it's kind of more special operations, like, hey, we're gonna sneak in somewhere and get caught in a gunfight, or have to find our ways out of this tricky situation because we can't get caught. So more espionage style.
Right, exactly. It's more of a smaller scope.
Right.
And you're going in the right direction. Because, like, if you're expecting, like we talked about with Civil War, if you're expecting this big war with 200 people on each side, that's not what you're getting
not
here.
Saving
You're
Private
actually
Ryan.
seeing-
Exactly. It's not Band of Brothers.
You're
It's
seeing
not-
a much
yeah.
smaller group work.
Yeah,
So,
and as far as this one, because like you said, it focuses on a team, it's, to me, it had that kind of Mission Impossible vibe without being fake. It had, an actual factual basis that drives the story. Yes, this was a thing that was happening.
Yeah.
We sent the team
it's
to
like
deal
the World
with.
War II version of Mission Impossible.
Right, and so that was kind of the vibes it gave
Accurate.
me. And obviously, like you said, for anybody who is a history buff, when they either going in knowing that it's based off factual things, or at the end when they find out, oh, this was a real thing. Like you said, some people will be inspired to go look at what the actual story was. Like you said, maybe read the book, or just even just do a quick Wikipedia search and go, hey, did this thing, like, what actually happened? Because I know for me, I watched Operation Mincemeat, and that one is a very serious movie. I enjoyed it, but when I went and looked at information, I then found out about an older movie that was done in the 50s, which was The Man Who Never Was, or something like that, never existed. And, so there was two different basic storytelling of the same operation that happened in real life. So as far as, from an audience standpoint, you could have two different stories or two different directors or studios or movies that tell the same story, and who's going to be the audience that they're catering to. In the case of the movie I use as an example, it's the same people. But in your movie, if you're talking about, hey, we're marketing this as an action film, we want to pull anybody who's interested in action movies or espionage movies into this core audience, and then we compare it to something like Operation Mincemeat or Spies on a Bridge or something like that. Both espionage movies, but very different. There is no fighting. There is no big battle action scenes. It's espionage, purely espionage.
Yeah.
There is no
It's
big
a different
fight
slant
scene.
on it.
Yeah.
Now, I got a quick question.
Those are good points.
Something just popped in my head.
Yes.
We saw Argyle. We saw Ungentlemanly Warfare, both starring Cavill, both kind of a secret agent-ish thing. Has there been, and forgive me if I'm behind here, has there been any mention of Cavill being the next, James Bond?
That's been a rumor, but he's not.
But I mean, I feel like because that's not happening now, are we getting a bunch of movies that show him in that facet? You know what I mean? Because just showing,
That
hey,
arena.
I can do a
He's-
spy thing.
Good
I
point.
can do a spy thing, and is
He's
this going to
been
lead to
typecast.
something?
I think he's been typecast in a lot of these action roles. Since he came back as Superman, we saw him.
Yeah.
We saw him in a Mission Impossible movie playing a spy. A double agent really.
Right.
But we saw him, like you said, in Argyle playing kind of like a spy, secret agent kind of guy.
We went from superhero to spy.
Well, technically, he was a Kingsman, but again, Kingsman still being the
Spy-ish.
a different, a very spy, secret ops kind of person. Kingsman is almost like a British equivalent of Mission Impossible. Like, oh yeah, we're not acknowledged. We operate on our own, thing. We're not involved with the government.
Yeah,
We're
like
our
the
own
foundation
Yeah,
of
we're
it is
our
the same.
own society, privately funded society. We're not part of the government. So versus like MI6.
British Men in Black. We don't
Yeah.
exist.
Well, it's kind of like how in this story, because this is kind of like showing the difference between in the U.S. We would have had programs that would have been disavowed and then eventually gained government backing. So you would have had examples would have been
Groups
like
within the
FBI,
CIA.
and then you've got these special programs within that which are
PMCs.
unacknowledged
Yeah.
programs.
Unofficially.
Right, like you work for us, but you don't work for us. If you get caught, we can't.
We don't know anything about you.
We don't even know. We'd have no idea who you are. And the case of a lot of what goes on in espionage and during World War II is they had tons of people, tons of these programs that nobody knew anything about. I can't tell you about my involvement with this program, even though we both work on this other program together.
Yeah.
And basically with Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, I think this is kind of showing how this was originally an unacknowledged program or whatever, and then eventually, like you were trying to say, it sounds like they got accepted after their work was done. They were like, oh, you know what? This is a good thing. We're going to use you some more. Like, we're going to go on with this group and do other things.
Accepted but not acknowledged.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then when people find out about it, you're like, okay, yeah, this is kind of the seedy underbelly of all of the different things that were going on that were unacknowledged, that were happening, but not everybody knew about.
Right.
And that's what's interesting, because you say, oh yeah, somebody somewhere knew. Like, there was a piece of paper redacted down to like 3 words in like this huge, dossier, document. And basically, after whatever the date of classification was, like, people who were either involved with it or knew about it because, they were related to the actual people or whatever, the story gets handed down and people are like, oh, I'm gonna do all the research and write this book. And so for, like you said, for people who are history buffs, it is there if they want it. To me, looking at this movie, I didn't know if it was factual or not, looking at the preview, because the way that they marketed it seemed like it was like, this is an action movie based during World War II, and these people are not your average soldiers. These are not your average straight-laced individuals. Like, they're rough around the edges. They're kind of the people where they're like, hey, you want to get something done, you call this guy, but don't expect him to show up for the Sunday brisk. Like, nobody's like, they're not going to come in their Sunday best and sit down for a nice dinner at the table. Like, they're the type of guys that
They're gristled down.
They're specific men. They're specific.
they have a particular set of
Skill.
skills.
Yes. That's exactly what I was going for.
In the words of Liam Neeson.
Yes.
With that being said, folks, I thought it was a great episode here. Like we said, the movie's not perfect, but decent. Didn't feel like I wasted my money. Yeah, if
It
you're
was a
interested,
good time.
Yeah, if you're interested, go watch it. If you want to stream it. But like we said, decent.
watching.
It's a decent enough movie. It's not the best movie ever. It's a cool movie. But yeah, I think we're gonna leave it there. It's Neff signing off with
Kage.
And buttons.
Now, please like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell for notifications, and share with a friend. And as always, folks, be safe.